Hello there and welcome back to Bloodborne. Today we'll be exploring the DLC content a bit, but first, before we do anything else, let's go buy that Cainhurst armor set that we unlocked a while back. Armor worn by the royal guards who protect Annalise, Queen of the Vilebloods at Cainhurst Castle. This paper-thin silver armor is said to deflect blood of ill intent, and is what allows the royal guards to capture prey for their beloved queen so that one day she may bear a child of blood. Whatever that means. This armor set is notable for boasting very high physical and blood defense, which makes it very popular for PvP, as those are the two most common damage types you'll see in PvP, since most weapons do physical damage, and guns, which are quite common, do blood damage. It'd also be helpful for the bit of the DLC that we'll be doing today. Nice and stylish. Well, one more thing before we go and check out the DLC. Checking back over this way, Gammon is back in this little side garden here.
Oh, Lawrence, Master Willem, somebody help me, unshackle me, please, anybody. I've had enough of this dream. The night blocks all sight. Oh, somebody, please.
So yeah, he is clearly not doing too well. He's calling out for Lawrence and Master Willem to help him, so clearly he knew them at some point. And just getting a good look at him here, the most notable thing about him aside from his tattered clothes is that he's actually missing his right leg and it is replaced with a peg leg. Just an interesting little detail that's worth pointing out, and you'll see especially why that is a bit later on in the episode. So yeah, let's go pick up that item that's been an eyesore since we killed Vicar Amelia. The eye of a blood-drunk hunter beckons hunters to the hunter's nightmare. A deformed creature will whisk you away outside Odin Chapel. Basically, that's instructions as to how to use this item to access the DLC, since otherwise people would have to figure that out. And that kind of pissed people off about the Dark Souls DLC. The eye of a blood-drunk hunter. Its pupil is collapsed and turned to mush, indicating the onset of the Scourge of Beasts. A hunter who goes drunk with blood is said to be taken by the nightmare, destined to wander forever, engaged in an endless hunt. It is a fate that no hunter can escape. So, let's get going to Odin Chapel then, to be whisked away by that deformed creature. The deformed creature, of course, being the amygdala that is clinging to its sides. I don't believe I've actually explicitly shown this off before, but this guy here is what was grabbing us way back when we picked up the alternate hunters set. Oh yeah, the old lady went out again, leaving us a note. Aw, how sweet. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like she'll ever be returning, as there's her corpse right there. She did manage to obtain a sedative at least, so we did gain rewards from her trip. If nothing else. Alright, then let's go get whisked away.
Cursed fiends, their children too. And their children forever true.
And so we enter the hunter's nightmare, immediately greeted by a rather familiar sight. This looks just like Odin Chapel, down to the lantern in this center circle here. But none of our friends seem to be here, and some of the passages entering or exiting are gone as well. There's still this double door here, but it cannot be opened from this side. And stepping outside, we're greeted by quite a sight. This is the first time in a long time that we've actually seen the sun, although this sun is a bit different than what we'd necessarily expect, seeming to have some sort of architecture within it. We've also got a bit more deja vu here, as this area looks like the shortcut in the cathedral ward that is outside and to the right of Odin Chapel, but it has shown up considerably earlier. And so we encounter our first enemy in the Hunter's Nightmare. Appropriately enough, it's another hunter, one who has gone mad and hunts beasts and hunters alike. They're probably the most dangerous commonly encountered enemy in the DLC, as they do a lot of damage, are incredibly aggressive, and have huge amounts of HP. They also come in several varieties, as we'll see as we go along. So even though we took out that one there without much trouble, they're not an enemy to be trifled with, that's for sure. At any rate, we picked up an old hunter cap after killing that hunter there. In the old days, when hunters were 10 a penny, this was part of their standard garb. So this was worn by hunters before the current era in Yharnam, when hunters were much more common. To go along with that, hunters are much more common here than they are in the base game, a way that the DLC considerably ratchets up the difficulty. Oh hey, there are some beasts up ahead. But it seems we were beaten to the hunt. And the Hunter's Nightmare beast exists solely to entertain the mad hunters who hunt them eternally. More relevantly for gameplay purposes, this allows for enemy infighting. Hunters will attack beasts and beasts will attack hunters as well as you, thus allowing you to control the difficulty of some fights a bit by allowing them to fight it out and then darting in when the iron is hot, so to speak. And it's a feature that I really like. More games need enemy infighting as a mechanic. And the fact that every game since Doom has not included this is quite a travesty, I think. At any rate, old hunter gloves. At the time, some hunters believed that certain metals would ward off beast blood. On a night of the hunt, it is no wonder that some resort to superstition. So hunters in the old day were not only a lot more common, but they were beholden to certain superstitions. I do kind of like how that mirrors real-world development of looking at diseases, at least from European nations. How originally they were seen as things like curses or maladies caused by demons, but then in the modern day people realize it's a disease caused by, or born of, blood. Also, yeah, apologies if there are any car sounds in the dialogue. I'm recording at my desk, which is at a window facing a busy street. I probably could have chosen a better time to record my commentary, but oh well. I've already started it, I'm not gonna stop. So yeah, appropriate of things that are constantly hunted. The beasts here are quite fearful of you and aren't overly aggressive, and this can be pretty easily taken out. You could even probably ignore them and be fine. It's not true of all of them, however. Some are just kinda pissed off and will attack you at first sight, so you do have to be wary of that. But we're not alone here, as there are a few hunters up ahead hunting them as well. Like I mentioned before, this can allow us to have a bit of an easier time. Rather than having to kill all of these enemies, we can let the hunters thin out the beasts a little, and then dart in to attack the hunters when they're distracted. Let's take out this one over here first, since we have experience fighting this type and he's off by his lonesome. So yeah, for the most part we'll be taking out these guys with visceral attacks, just because that's the most efficient and safe way of fighting them, honestly. Most of the hunters have slow attacks with large amounts of windup which make them easy to stagger. And they also have a large amount of hyper armor when they are attacking, so it is difficult to stun them with quicker, less harder hitting weapons like the Chikage and Rider Palash. Unless you're using the Ludwig's Holy Blade or the Kirkhammer, don't expect to stun them out of their attacks before they can get off a counterattack on you. And if they hit you even once, you're gonna take a lot of damage, so basically it boils down to staggering them just being a lot safer, assuming you can get the timing right, of course. If you fail it, it's gonna be dangerous in and of itself. If you're especially patient and have a stockpile of Quicksilver bullets, you can also cheese them with arcane tools. The Augurer of Ebrietas is especially effective since it does decent damage and knocks them down, allowing you to just chain tentacle them over and over. But that takes a while and is rather boring, so again, visceral attacks to do the brunt of the damage. If you can take down the hammer-wielding hunters, you're probably pretty good for this area, as they are, in my opinion, the most difficult type of hunter. And with the hunters dead, we can mop up the beasts easily enough and pick up all the items that they dropped. And again, for similarities to areas from the base game, this area here resembles the graveyard/courtyard that is in the Cathedral Ward, the one guided by several church giants. Something else that the DLC does that I quite like is that it actually incorporates traps into its level design far more than the base game. For example, this trap here with the pressure plate that would activate that gun should we step on it. So let's avoid doing that. In fact, let's see if we can't make use of that trap ourselves and trigger it to take out these rather nefarious dog enemies. Unfortunately, it doesn't work out quite like how I'd imagined. In fact, the bullets hit none of the dogs and I just have to take them out with the Chikage, which is unfortunate. Alright, let's just get rid of this thing here just to be safe. Continuing on here, we meet one more type of hunter enemy in this area. This one wielding yet another new weapon, as well as a rifle, both of which we'll be able to get later on. I mentioned before that I find the hammer-wielding ones to be the most dangerous, and I stand by that, but these guys here can be also difficult to deal with. Their attacks are either incredibly fast or incredibly slow, which makes them difficult to visceral attack. But they also have the lowest amount of HP, so they're the easiest to take out with regular attacks. An especially easy way to take them out is to stand far enough away to bait out their rifle shots, dash in and then get a few hits and then dash out and repeat ad infinitum. So here's a bit weird. I know from playing this spot many times that there's actually an ambush here by a rather tough hammer-wielding hunter, and I try to trigger it nice and slowly, but it doesn't work. As it turns out, he only comes down if you actually attack these beasts here, or at least simply walking forward is not enough to trigger his descent. He's a bit different than the hammer-wielding ones we've encountered before. If you look closely at his face, you'll see the difference. As he has the glowing red eyes that signify that he is a tougher variant of that enemy type, having more than twice the HP. But again, with these enemy types, if you can manage your visceral attacks against them regularly, they're no trouble at all. And then you can just finish it off with Augur spam. Unfortunately, he is guarding a very worthy reward for taking him out. Oh, he also drops a vermin, one of the few ways that you can get them without doing co-op. As for the reward, it is a new weapon, the Beast Cutter. We'll actually be checking that out in a bit, don't you worry. But we don't want to head back to the dream just yet without having unlocked a shortcut first. Otherwise we'd have to go through all that content again, and that would be rather dull. Here we encounter another scythe-wielding hunter. That's what the weapon is called, the Beast Hunter Scythe. This one is not wielding a rifle, and so he's considerably more aggressive, and the previous cheese strat that I mentioned doesn't work against him for that reason. I try in vain to stagger him repeatedly, but fail. I just am not good with the timings for these guys, unfortunately. I do manage it with the Augur of Ebrietas, though. That's actually kind of an interesting thing with regards to parrying in the Souls games and staggering with shots in this game, is the fact that if you're having trouble with doing that against a certain enemy type, you may actually have more success if you switch to another parry tool, one with a different timing. For example, if you typically use a pistol to stagger enemies, but you're up against one where you need to fire it later than you necessarily would given the usual timings, you can just use the blunderbuss rather than having to adjust your own timing, and have that taken into account for you. The Augur of Ebrietas is similar in that respect. As for commenting on things that are actually currently happening, the early bits of the DLC love giving you bloodstone shards, essentially telling you you really ought to have at least a +6 weapon if you're doing this content here. If not, preferably higher. At any rate, dropping down here, we pick up another piece of the old hunter set, which we'll check out in just a bit. Actually, probably the most interesting bit from its item description, and you'll see why. But here, we finally unlock our first shortcut. This is the gate that the first hunter we ran across was guarding, letting us easily get back to the lantern. A widespread belief of that period was that beast blood crept up the right leg, and this led to the double-wrapped belt. Beast blood crept up the right leg, and if you remember, Gammon was missing his right leg, having it replaced with a peg leg. An interesting little detail. At any rate, now that we're back at the dream, let's look at the beast cutter which we've upgraded. This crude weapon relies on brute force and is regrettably inelegant, suggesting that the hunts of the earliest hunters made for horrific affairs, painted in sanguine blacks and reds. And as for getting back to the nightmare, we use this gravestone that's been here all along. Nice little bit of housekeeping there on the developer's part. So, getting back to the beast cutter for a bit then. The most succinct way to describe it would be like a heavier strength version of the threaded cane. Its untransform mode is a heavy cleaver-like sword, which hits and stuns for fairly hard, although not as much as you'd expect from a weapon as slow as it is. Meanwhile, its transform mode is a segmented blade that can be swung around at a distance like a long whip. Its range is even greater than that of the threaded cane, but it is much slower, and thus a lot more difficult to safely use, especially due to the fact that far and away the biggest weakness of the weapon is that it has absurdly low rally bonus, something that differentiates weapons aside from moveset and damage. Is the fact that they have different strengths when rallying. Some recover a lot of HP, others recover barely any at all, and the beast cutter is definitely on the weaker edge of that spectrum. Still, overall it's a pretty effective weapon versus groups as long as you use it carefully, and it's excellent for cheesing enemies at a distance with its transformed R2, as that thing has ridiculous outward reach. It is also, I'm quite happy to say, one of the more underwhelming weapons introduced by the DLC. This is the baseline and it just goes up from here for the most part. Oh, and if you haven't yet realized it, this whole area is incredibly similar to the ascent up to the Grand Cathedral, where we fought Ricca Amelia. Perhaps there is a boss ahead? First though, we get this rather obvious trap to deal with. The only way you're likely to get hit by it is if you're completely distracted by these beasts here, but as long as you pay attention, it's no threat. And it's more helpful than it is hurtful, since it takes out most of those beasts. And here we pick up the final piece of the old hunter set, the chest piece. One day the hunters disappeared, and Yanamites began to whisper of the hunter's sin. Drunk with blood, chasing after beasts, they would pass on to the nightmare, every last one of them. It almost makes it sound like the hunter's nightmare is something of an afterlife for hunters, their Valhalla, if you will. At any rate, continuing on up here, the cathedral doors are being opened by that axe-wielding guy up there. Let's hang back a bit and let him deal with those hunters first. Alright. Well, he doesn't seem to be paying much attention to us, so let's just check around the side here first. Oh dear, he's noticed us. Alright, we're gonna have to deal with him then. This here is a nightmarish version of the executioners that we've seen before, although I and many others like to just refer to them as axe-thulus, due to their betentacled faces and the fact that they wield giant axes. Though we take out this one here without much difficulty, they are an enemy type, not to be trifled with, much like the hunters. Their attacks do quite a bit of damage, and we were lucky here in that he did not use some of his most dangerous attacks, which we will hopefully see in the future. At any rate, let's continue into the Grand Cathedral proper then. Again, as I previously mentioned, this is where we fought Vicar Amelia in the Cathedral Ward. And given the sights ahead, it seems we're due for another boss. This one looking remarkably like the cleric beast we fought way back as our first boss, although this one is considerably more lava-y. Seems like he's lounging on his chair there, so let's nick this item from him then. An eye pendant which unlocks the surgery altar. There were two cathedrals in the hunter's dream. One lies past the River of Blood, and another contains the private research hall of the Healing Church. The geographic locations in the hunter's nightmare were clearly named by a metal band. Alright, so let's prepare for the boss fight then. It's not coming alive. Yeah, the developers play a bit of a trick on you here. They set it up that it looks like that fiery cleric beast will attack you as soon as you approach it, or after obtaining the item as you're exiting the cathedral, but that is not the case. That is not to say that we won't be fighting him at some point in the future, but that won't be for a while yet. So let's continue on then, to the right of the Grand Cathedral. This led to Yaha Ghul in Regulianum. Let's see where it leads here. Here we have a bit of an obstacle course, as we have to progress through these hunters shooting rounds at us. Fortunately, there are many places to take cover here, including the dead body of an amygdala, interestingly enough. Especially interesting given that, as I previously mentioned, this was where amygdalas were, at least the general direction, in Regulianum. I'm not sure if that's on purpose or not, or if it's just a coincidence. As long as you don't get hit by more than one volley at a time, you should be fine. And then you can make your way forward and kill the hunter, activating these guns here. If you notice, this huntsman here is actually standing right by a pressure plate to trigger as you walk past. Sometimes he steps forward such that he actually ends up getting hit by his own trap, which unfortunately did not happen here. And let's just break all of these guns here just to be safe if we need a retreat. We don't want to accidentally trigger one while we're fleeing. So this enemy type here can be a real pain in the ass. They're not especially threatening by themselves, but with others of their type, or supporting other more dangerous enemies, they can be a real bother. And that is because they throw time-delayed Molotovs. The Molotovs aren't too terribly threatening, but they do just enough damage and stun you just for long enough that it can be really inopportune to have them explode by your feet when you're fighting another actually dangerous enemy like this hammer-wielding huntsman here. So it's best to just draw this guy away from the rest and then take him out when he's by his lonesome. Another valid strategy is to bum rush the two delayed Molotov throwing guys and kill them before the hammer-wielding huntsman shows up, but that is obviously a riskier option. And once these guys are by themselves, they're no threat at all. Very easy to take out. One nice thing about this DLC is that they give you a lot of blood vials, plenty of fixed placements, and most of the enemies have a pretty high chance of dropping one or a few. So you're very unlikely to ever run out of them, even if you do terribly. Quicksilver bullets are another matter, but thankfully they're the cheaper item at the Hunter Dream shop. And this here must be the River of Blood. A blood-soaked stretch of land covered with blood liquors, our favorite enemy. Can't wait to get to that. But first, we have to go through this copy of that one house in Yharnam that's all darkened and requires a light source. Here, after dealing with this rather ineffective ambush, we can actually pick up some delayed Molotovs of our own. Unfortunately, it's not really a cause for celebration, as delayed Molotovs are a terrible item to use. They're the same strength as other Molotovs, and it's really hard to hit enemies with them in both PvE and PvP. In PvP, other players will just dash away from them and won't have a chance to get hit. And in PvE, enemies will often wander away before they have time to explode, so you're better off just throwing a regular one at them, which they probably won't even think to dodge. Here's a bit of an interesting turn. It's a trap situation, like the one way back in Yharnam, but rather than a wheelchair man waiting to snipe us, it's instead a delayed explosion trap. If you look closely, you can actually see a fuse light on the corpse on the wheelchair, and hear a very faint ticking. But yeah, for falling for that trap, we were able to obtain the boom hammer, which is the weapon that the hammer-wielding hunters were using. It's a pretty cool trick weapon with a somewhat novel gimmick, as we'll be seeing when we use it in the future. Over here is probably one of the tougher encounters in this early portion of the DLC. This here is our first player-type hunter encountered in the DLC. All the previous hunters were what I would call an enemy type. That is, they play by their own rules, whereas this here is the exact same as any other player, aside from buff stats of course. And that makes them pretty tricky, as these type of hunters, as we've seen in the base game, tend to be pretty good with their dodges and can be pretty tricky to hit. Doesn't help that I'm exceptionally poor at staggering this one, although I make several valiant attempts to do that throughout the fight. Yeah, this fight goes on long enough that I decided to speed up the footage, otherwise it would be like 2 to 3 minutes, which wouldn't be too exciting. Especially since I do rather poorly. As I mentioned, I don't exactly have the best weapons set up. If you're not good at staggering them, the best weapon is either something incredibly quick, so you can get in hits even with his attempts to dodge, or something with a very slow but powerful charge attack, such as the Ludwig's Holy Blade or the Kirkhammer, which, if timed right, can easily hit him as he attempts to do an attack, and really do a large amount of damage to his HP. These sort of middle-of-the-road weapons that aren't exceptionally quick or exceptionally powerful are rather poor against them, but we eventually eke out a victory. Now, we don't get his weapon for killing him, just a badge, and that badge does not allow us to purchase his weapon either. He is actually using a weapon from the base game, the Beast Claw, that we previously seen used by one of the hunters in Yahar Ghul, part of the gank squad there. but his moveset was considerably different for whatever reason. We'll find out the reason for that later. It might have something to do with his beastly nature. At any rate, our actual reward is the Firing Hammer Badge of the Auto Workshop, precursor to the Powder Kegs, who, if you remember from the base game, were known for their rather bombastic weapons. Bombastic as in they are quite explosive, and the weapons of the Auto Workshop are no less an example of that. And here we finally come to the River of Blood, a feasting ground for many blood liquors. Despite what it may seem, however, this area is actually a lot easier than you'd expect after having done Canehurst Castle, because these blood liquors are slightly different. Having become fat with blood, they are no longer capable of their vicious leaping attack. They have since gained a new trick in the fact that they can spit out blood like a machine gun, but it's not too terribly threatening. It doesn't do all that much damage or poison bleed up, and it's easy enough to avoid. So these guys are a far cry from their base game counterparts, so there being an entire area filled with them isn't that big of a deal, thankfully. Especially if you're careful and aggro them one at a time, like so. This is not a strategy I use here, but Shaman Bone Blades would also be effective if you end up aggroing more than one at a time. Since even if they're not terribly good at killing us, they are good at killing each other. Yeah, despite its initial appearances, the River of Blood really isn't all that threatening of an area. It certainly is evocative though, and it does leave the question, what exactly is causing this River of Blood? Is there some giant beast ahead that is just bleeding out its entire body, or something else? Questions upon questions. It's interesting, the River of Blood is the first entirely new bit of level that we've seen in the DLC so far. Everything else has been repurposed from the main game. Altered significantly, yes, but still repurposed. And that's a rather brave choice, especially since that's only true for this very initial portion of the DLC. The rest of it is entirely new content, so to open up with reusing assets from the base game is kind of a risky choice. You risk alienating the players by making them think that that's all the DLC is going to be, and giving them a lack of interest in following through with it, especially if they're having trouble, which is likely considering how difficult the enemies are. And finally, at last, we're done with these blood liquors. I feel that they put a few too many there, especially considering how much of a non-threat they are. So here we come to one of the more interesting bits of level in this first bit of the DLC. It too is entirely new, and it's also kind of a pain in the ass to do right from the get-go, for a reason you'll see in like 10 seconds. Or less than 10 seconds. Yeah, this hunter here is a real asshole. So, making you fight NPCs or other player-type enemies in these games, that is, enemies that use player models and play by mostly the same rules as you, one thing they like to do is to buff their stats, and that is something that is absolutely necessary. If the enemy hunters had the same stats as actual players, they would be effortless to take out, as they would only take 3 to 6 hits depending on the weapon to kill, and then they wouldn't be that threatening because unlike a player, they can't respond dynamically, only pre-fixed patterns which can be learned and exploited. So them having far more HP and defense, this makes sense. Similarly, them having infinite bullets in this game also makes sense, otherwise they would quickly run out of an important part of their arsenal, their gun. Unfortunately, this is one of those cases where it doesn't really work out that well. Because he has infinite bullets, he can just spam that Gatling gun all day and there's really not much you can do about it. Add in the fact that he takes a while to take down even if you have good damage output thanks to his high HP and defense, and he's not really worth dealing with at this point. So we'll run away and come back later when we're a bit stronger, a bit more ready to take him on, and to discover the treasures that he's guarding. So let's head back this way and check out the other end of the River of Blood. There's more bloodlickers, but we don't have to face them just yet. We can sneak by them and head up this stairway to the side. That's generally a good way of handling this encounter here, because otherwise you'll have to fight the bloodlickers while being sniped by these assholes. Taking them out makes dealing with them much easier. There are both regular hunters and the tougher scythe-wielding hunters. I recommend targeting the scythe-wielding ones first, since they're actually dangerous, but don't discount the lesser ones. They can really screw you up, especially if you end up getting surprised by them. So at this point, you're probably noticing that the episode is actually almost over. And it doesn't look like we're anywhere near done with this area, and that is true. We're gonna be stopping midway, because similar to the forest, this area is quite big and is so best split into multiple parts. So there'll be no boss fight to end this video, unfortunately. Also, we'll be checking out the description for that glove at a later date. But rather than end off with just stopping here in the middle of nowhere, let's actually make some progress here, which we'll do by heading this way. For here is our first proper NPC in the Hunter's Nightmare.
You're a hunter with your sanity, aren't you? Must have taken a wrong turn then, eh? Well, we're more alike than you think. This is the Hunter's Nightmare, where hunters end up when drunk with blood. You've seen them before. Aimless, wandering hunters slavering like beasts. This is what the poor fools have to look forward to. So, don't be brash. Turn back before it's too late. Unless you've something of an interest in nightmares. Oh yes, I see. You sense a secret within the nightmare, and cannot bear to leave it be. As if the spirit of Bergenworth lives on within you. Such inquisitive hunters will relish the nightmare. But beware. Secrets are secrets for a reason, and some do not wish to see them uncovered. Especially when the secrets are particularly unseemly. Beware. Secrets are secrets for a reason, and some do not wish to be discovered, especially when the secrets are particularly unseemly.
That there was Simon the Harrowed, and we'll be seeing him as we progress through the DLC. But of more immediate importance is this shortcut here leading back to the very start, and allowing us to skip all those troublesome enemies. So, goodbye, my lovely hunters, and see you all next time as we explore deeper into the Hunter's Nightmare.